mean, this would be the most dramatic upheaval, of our law that we've ever seen in this country. And again, this is something that is completely and utterly smuggled into the bill.
South Africa's parliament is currently reviewing draft legislation which would change the way in which discrimination is classified under the PEPUDA Act, also known as the Equality Act. What are the implications of this, particularly for freedom of expression in the country? Well, in this extract from a longer conversation on my podcast, Solutions with David Ansara, I spoke with Advocate Mark Oppenheimer about the legal implications of this draft bill. What is PEPUDA and how does it work?
So PEPUDA is the legislation which regulates hate speech in South Africa. It also creates the equality courts, and this is the venue in which hate speech disputes are resolved. It's been quite controversial. There's been much debate about defining what hate speech is, and the hate speech section itself was found to be unconstitutional by our Supreme Court of Appeal, and that question is now being decided on appeal by the Constitutional Court. It also deals with unfair discrimination. So it's recognized that some forms of discrimination might be justifiable, but if they are unfair, there can be sanctions attached to it. And it also has provisions which prohibit harassment. So in broad terms, that is what the legislation governs.
Okay, Mark, so could you give us more background into this proposed amendment and what is being put on the table? And one of the concerns that I've seen is the change of this definition of equality and discrimination. So those two terms which are in the existing act. What is the significance of that? That seems fairly innocuous, but perhaps you could help our viewers and listeners to understand the risks that underlie that.
Yes, so the terms equality and discrimination are used throughout the primary legislation. So their redefinition in the amendment bill would have quite broad effects. So first of all, one of the things that it does with regards to discrimination is remove the requirement that discrimination must be done intentionally. And then it also broadens its scope. So at the moment, discrimination is about imposing burdens or obligations or withholding benefits or opportunities and doing it on the grounds of a sort of set of protected characteristics like race or sex or gender, those sorts of things. This now also adds in acts or omissions which cause prejudice or otherwise undermine the dignity of someone. And it doesn't even have to be the case that it's on one of these listed grounds, just that there's some kind of connection with the ground. So it doesn't have to be the dominant or the sole reason. So why that matters is this idea of fault is seen as a major requirement in our law. So if you think about committing a crime, it's not sufficient that you merely perform an action. So killing another human being is not murder. You have to do it with intent, or you've got to do it negligently, like in a culpable homicide case. So this is something we can touch on in some detail, but it's a flag worth raising. With regards to equality, again, we have a sort of redefinition, and this idea is to sort of move away from that kind of equality before the law, everyone having an equal opportunity, and this is to move towards an equality of outcomes, that everyone must have equal rights to resources, opportunities, benefits, and advantages. This idea that we must have substantive equality. And as we'll see through our discussion, this becomes very onerous on those that are meant to provide the substantive equality, that are meant to provide all of these resources to everybody.
Enjoying this analysis? Click here to sign up for our 30-day free trial for more content from the CIA.
When we talk about equality, I mean, that seems like a nice concept, something worth striving for. It's good to treat people equally and not based on, say, arbitrary characteristics like the color of their skin or the language that they speak. But why is this problem of equality of outcomes something that you're concerned with? What's the difference between that and equality of opportunity?
Yeah, so if you think about running a race, for example, if you think that everybody should start in the same position when you fire off the gun, but then depending on who trained harder for the race, who's more athletic, who's better, those are the people that should be able to prosper. Now, equality of outcomes would ensure that everybody finishes at identical times. And one way to do that would be to impose burdens on those that are the most meritorious, those that are the fittest, to shackle them so that they run slower and ensure that they come out at exactly the same time as those that are the worst in the race. There's a famous story written by Kurt Vonnegut called Harrison Bergeron, and it opens with the line, "We finally achieved equality in the year 2081." And it's a story about this family of people who are reasonably gifted in some sort of way. So the son is very strong, very smart. So he has to wear these headphones, which blast sounds at him, so that his thoughts are interrupted. He has to carry around these huge, heavy sacks so that he's weakened. And that's one way that you can achieve equality of outcomes, is to ensure that everybody is equally poorly off. It's very hard to ensure that everybody is equally prosperous. And one way you could do that is to try and take from those that have things and redistribute them. Now, we've tried this experiment before. So if you look at countries that had a utopian ideal of everyone having the same outcomes, this is what was tried in the Soviet Union. This is what was tried in under Mao's China, to devastating effects. This kind of communism led to the deaths of 100 million people. Societies that say everybody should have an equal go at it, that we shouldn't impose burdens arbitrarily, those societies tend to prosper. So when people are incentivized to be meritorious, to try and excel, to be the best possible people they can be, those places are places that you want to live, and they're often best for those that are at the bottom of the pile. You'd much rather be poor, let's say at the bottom of the pile in a place like America than the Soviet Union.
So now one of the other points is that this would necessitate a change to pretty much every single law in South Africa. Is that a correct interpretation of this proposed draft law?
Yes, I'll read you an extract from what comes out in the bill, and it gives you a real sense of this utopian vision. So it says, the measures to be adopted by the state to achieve equality must proactively address systemic and multidimensional patterns of inequality and discrimination found in social structures, rules, attitudes, actions, or omissions, which prevent the full and equal enjoyment of rights and freedoms as contemplated in the Constitution, including equal access to resources, opportunities, benefits, advantages, and social goods. And the proposal is that all existing law must be overhauled to comply with this grand vision. So all government ministers have to go and look at the law that's in their sector and see whether it meets these objectives. Now, just think about the cost involved in such a legislative review. I mean, this would be the most dramatic upheaval of our law that we've ever seen in this country. And again, this is something that is completely and utterly smuggled into the bill. No one was alerted to this in the very brief advertisement that was put out by the Ministry for Justice. So I think something to be concerned about. And what's hard about these things is these words all sound lovely. Who doesn't want to have lots of opportunities, and we all have equal rights and freedoms. But once you start talking about resources, once you start saying that everybody needs to have the same stuff, well, at whose cost? Someone's got to pay for that stuff, and once we start talking about people feeling like they're prejudiced from the acts and omissions of others, well, then we start to have regulations of people's behavior and encouragements that they must act in a certain way. And it just creates this inertia and this anxiety. It's not very good for really what the purpose of the legislation was for, which is really to try and overcome a lot of the wrongs that we had in our past, to have a non-racial society that's premised on a kind of reconciliation, as opposed to one that is about pitting everyone against everyone else constantly.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Solutions with David Ansara podcast. If you'd like to watch the full interview, you can click on the link in the description below, as well as here. I'd be hugely grateful if you could subscribe to that channel as well and share it on your social media networks. My name is David Ansara. This is the Center for Risk Analysis. Until next time, take care.